Chapter 5. He showed me true freedom with just a $2 bill. Part 1. The leather wallet and the wordless lunch. I intended to refuse that lunch. The decision felt like pure self-preservation, an automatic recoil from any gesture that smacked of charity. I wasn't hungry, or so I told myself. My stomach might have rumbled, but the pride of a man who clawed at existence under the scorching sun for every meager dollar wouldn't permit me to accept a meal from an old man, a man who seemed to inhabit an entirely different world, a world free of sweat, of grime, of the relentless anxieties of making ends meet. I wasn't hungry enough to accept pity from an old man in a pristine white shirt, sitting on his porch as if he had no urgent cares, no pressing obligations. Yes, white shirt, that emblem of serenity, of a life untouched by hardship, which I had come to despise to my very core. Every time I saw him on his porch, a familiar thought ran through my mind. He has all day to sit there, to read, to watch the clouds drift by. He has money. He has nothing to worry about. And me? I'm struggling, minute by minute. It was this stark, cruel contrast between our two worlds that had built an invisible wall, thick with my prejudices and resentment. And this lunch, I feared, would be just another testament to that wall, another piece of evidence for the unbridgeable chasm between us. Yet, when Mr. Harrison, with his usual composed gesture, placed the lunchbox on the small wooden table already set on the porch, a tiny detail caught my eye, completely dismantling my defenses. Beside the simple navy blue bento box, what I implicitly considered laborer's lunch, I suddenly saw an old leather wallet. It wasn't the sort of sleek, polished wallet one might associate with the wealthy, but a worn, seasoned piece bearing the marks of time and a long cherished companionship. That wallet, like a door ajar, hinted at another facet of him, utterly distinct from his usual immaculate facade. The wallet's flap was slightly open, just enough for me to glimpse its contents without feeling I was prying. And that's when I saw it, a $2 bill. It wasn't crisp and new, but neither was it crumpled or tattered. On the contrary, it was carefully folded flat, as if freshly ironed, nestled neatly within a compartment. Not a $100 bill, not a $50, not even a $20, just a $2 bill. A $2 bill. Its monetary value was insignificant, yet its presence carried a strange weight. Why a $2 bill? In this day and age, who still carried a $2 bill, and with such reverence? It didn't seem like he was trying to flaunt his wealth. Instead, it evoked something deeply private, intensely personal, as if the bill itself held a story, a special meaning for Mr. Harrison. Perhaps it was a gift from a loved one, a memento, or a good luck charm. I didn't know, but the meticulous care he showed for such a small, seemingly worthless item left me bewildered. A peculiar sensation ran down my spine. It wasn't hunger, nor anger, nor the constant envy. It was curiosity, a curiosity that permeated every cell, breaking through my hardened shell. That carefully folded $2 bill, that seemingly insignificant detail, possessed the power to completely alter my decision. It wasn't a showy act of generosity, but a profoundly human moment. I realized I was seeing a side of Mr. Harrison I had never considered before, a dimension beyond the serene exterior and the wealth I had always ascribed to him. That $2 bill, by some inexplicable way, awakened a tiny spark of empathy within me, a sense that this man, despite his distant and perfect appearance, also held stories, his own values that I was completely unaware of. It was like seeing a small crack in a formidable wall, and that crack made me desperately curious to know what lay beyond. For some reason, I changed my mind. The decision didn't come from logic, but from a more primal urge. Possibly from curiosity, possibly from a fragile hope that I would discover something new, something that might dismantle the deep-seated prejudices that had taken root in my mind. Whatever it was, that moment of seeing the $2 bill was a small yet significant turning point. I abandoned my intention to refuse, and instead, I automatically moved towards the table, accepting the silent invitation. This lunch, I sensed, would be more than just a meal. It would be a door opening to a new chapter, wordless yet deeply meaningful. Part 2. The Chair and the Silent Challenge. Under the cool shade of the eaves, the air was thick with stillness. It was an unsettling stillness, a peace that didn't belong in my world. Lunch was served with meticulous care, as if it were not merely a meal but some ritual. 2 Japanese-style bento boxes rested neatly on the small wooden table, their navy blue surfaces calm and understated. Each box had a pair of bamboo chopsticks perfectly aligned, beside a crisp white linen napkin, folded with such precision I hesitated to touch it. 2 simple, sturdy wooden chairs faced each other symmetrically, as if predestined for an encounter, a wordless dialogue. I stepped forward, pulled out a chair, and sat down. But even seated, I couldn't relax. My entire body seemed to contract into an invisible defense. Every muscle, every sinew felt taut, ready for a confrontation I couldn't define. I didn't know if I was entering an awkward social conversation where I'd have nothing to say, a test of manners I might fail, or simply another intentional silence from Mr. Harrison, a silence I had once utterly detested. This silence, instead of providing comfort, evoked a sense of latent pressure, as if I was being judged without any clear criteria. Mr. Harrison said nothing. He didn't look at me, not a single glance to gauge my reaction, not a slight nod to reassure or acknowledge. He simply opened his own bento box. His every movement was slow, deliberate, and full of reverence. He used his chopsticks to pick up small portions of rice, chewing unhurriedly, as if savoring every grain, without haste or distraction. His entire attention seemed dedicated solely to the meal before him. That serenity, that focus, made me feel superfluous, profoundly out of place in his private space. I, with my chaotic thoughts and restless agitation, was a discordant note in his tranquil symphony. I looked at him, then down at the bento box in front of me. It was identical to his, from its color and material to the precise arrangement of its contents. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel comfortable. A strange discomfort welled up inside me, a feeling very much like I was eating on someone else's dime. Despite there being 2 identical portions, prepared separately and placed honorably before me, I couldn't shake the notion that I was the one receiving charity, pity from another. It was like being invited into an exquisitely elegant space, and every action you take feels clumsy, out of place. I had always thought poverty was simply the absence of money. That was the definition society had etched into my mind for years. Poor meant empty pockets, not enough to get by, struggling daily to survive. But in that moment, under this quiet porch, before Mr. Harrison's composure and my own lunchbox, I suddenly understood a deeper, far more brutal meaning. Poverty is also when you don't know how to receive a gift without feeling inferior. It's the spiritual indigence, the wretchedness of bruised pride. It's when another's kindness becomes a burden, when goodwill transforms into proof of one's own inadequacy. My whole body remained tense, not from fear, but from a fierce internal battle raging within me. I struggled against the feeling of being the lesser one, the recipient of a handout, the one who had to bow down. Mr. Harrison's silence did not alleviate this burden. On the contrary, it acted like an invisible mirror, reflecting all my prejudices and complexes. He didn't need to utter a word. But his calm demeanor and serene presence spoke volumes on their own, inadvertently becoming a silent challenge to my struggling soul. This wordless lunch, it turned out, was an invaluable lesson in self-awareness, about a poverty that resides not in the wallet, but in the heart. Part 3. I hated that serenity. Under the sun-drenched eaves, the air was thick with silence. It was an uncomfortable stillness, a peace that did not belong in my world. The lunch continued in complete muteness, broken only by the faint click of chopsticks against the bento box and Mr. Harrison's measured chewing. Each tiny sound was like a knife slicing into the chaos of my mind. I felt like a rough stone incongruously placed in a meticulously tended Zen garden. The greater the contrast, the higher my unease mounted. The more I ate, the more something nameless swelled within me, an inexpressible emotion, impossible to confine within any simple word. It wasn't annoyance, not a fleeting irritation. It wasn't shame for having accepted a meal. Also not self-consciousness, though a sense of inferiority always simmered within me. No, all those emotions were too superficial compared to what was tearing at my chest. It was deeper, more haunting. I hated his serenity. Hated the way he just sat there, incredibly calm, as if all the worries, all the stress in the world were alien concepts. Hated the way he ate each small bite, savoring it slowly like a man who never had to rush, never had to face the pressure of time or invisible deadlines. Hated his terrifying silence. It wasn't the silence of someone with nothing to say, but the silence of someone who didn't need to say anything. A silence filled with self-possession, composure, and a profound understanding of himself and the world around him. Meanwhile, inside me, a factory was running at full throttle, gears of thought grinding, emotions clashing wildly. Sweat still hadn't dried on my forehead. The smell of freshly cut grass and earth still clung to my clothes. My mind was still reeling with lists of tasks to do, bills to pay, worries about an uncertain future. Mr. Harrison said nothing, didn't judge me or comment on my work or my life. But it was precisely that silent serenity that made me feel so noisy inside, awkwardly noisy. I felt as though every chaotic thought, every anxiety, every rush within me was laid bare before his absolute stillness. It was a raw exposure of everything I tried to hide. That feeling was like an undercurrent, rising steadily, threatening to drown my fragile composure. I tried to eat, tried to focus on the rice, but every bite felt stuck in my throat. I clenched my jaw, my teeth grinding, trying to suppress the emotions on the verge of erupting. I wanted to break this silence, to do something to shake his unassailable facade. I wanted him to show some emotion, a hint of worry, something more human. Finally, I couldn't bear it anymore. The words burst from my throat, heavy and challenging. Why don't you ask anything? No one invites a stranger to lunch and just stays silent. My voice was perhaps a bit sharp, a bit dry, as if I'd been holding myself back for too long. I expected some reaction, a look of surprise, a slight frown of annoyance, or at least an explanation for his unsettling silence. I wanted an argument, a justification, something I could latch onto to retort, to blame. But no, he kept eating, still with that slow, composed gesture. He didn't look up at me. Not a single eyebrow twitched. His reaction was to not react. That drove me even crazier than if he had simply yelled back at me. That composure wasn't just a facade. It seemed to be his essence, his very breath. After a moment, having unhurriedly finished the last bite of rice in his mouth, he gently set his chopsticks down. The sound of the chopsticks touching the bento box was still very soft, making no harsh noise. He looked straight ahead, not directly into my eyes, but as if gazing at some indefinite point on the horizon. or looking right through me. His voice was low, calm, without anger and without sounding like he was explaining, as if he was merely stating an obvious truth. If you're not comfortable, you can leave. That sentence, seemingly simple, struck me like a steel punch to the gut. I froze as if a cold current ran down my spine. All the arguments I had prepared, all the explosions I had been building up, vanished into thin air. No words could be more cutting when they held no bite. No judgment could be harsher when it held no malice. His words weren't a polite dismissal, nor a reproach. They were simply an affirmation of freedom, an absolute respect for my choice. He didn't force me to stay, didn't try to justify his actions. He simply pointed out a truth. If I felt uncomfortable, that was my problem, and I had the right to choose to escape it. His serenity wasn't meant to provoke, but to allow him to live his way, and I had the right to choose how I reacted to it. In that moment, I realized I had failed my own silent test. I had allowed another's serenity to control my emotions, to stir up my annoyance and inferiority complex. And Mr. Harrison, with a single simple sentence, had exposed it all. He wasn't the one making me uncomfortable. It was my own reaction to his piece. Lunch continued, but its meaning had completely changed. Part 4. The Old Wallet and the Untradeable Currency. After Mr. Harrison's brief, impactful statement, "If you're not comfortable, you can leave," the lunch space sank back into silence. This time, the silence no longer felt oppressive or judgmental. It carried a different nuance, a quiet pause for contemplation, for thoughts swirling in my mind. His words weren't a dismissal, but an acceptance, a permission for me to choose freely. And that very freedom felt more unsettling than any form of coercion. I felt like I was standing at an invisible crossroads, one path leading to a retreat with all my old prejudices intact, the other to staying and confronting something new, though I didn't yet know what. I almost stood up. A rational part of me argued that it was enough. I had felt uncomfortable. I had spoken, and he had given me an exit. Leaving would be the simplest way to escape the awkwardness, to escape the enigma of this man. But then, as if an invisible force held me back, my gaze unconsciously drifted down to his old leather wallet, the very thing that had initially captured my attention and kept me seated here. The wallet lay exactly where it had been, beside the half-empty bento box. This time, I looked closer. Not a furtive or hurried glance as before, but a deliberate observation, a curious exploration. Inside the wallet, besides a few ordinary paper bills, there was only one other unusual item. It wasn't a credit card or an ID or the usual things one finds in a wallet. That was a $2 bill, meticulously laminated, folded neatly in half lengthwise, and placed as if it were a cherished memento, a personal treasure. The clear plastic encased it, protecting it from every impact of time and wear. It was shiny, almost pristine, unlike other bills that might wrinkle with age. This careful preservation, for such a small denomination, intensified my curiosity. My curiosity was stronger than my awkwardness. I couldn't help it. I pointed towards the wallet, towards the laminated $2 bill, and blurted out, "Why do you keep that bill? Who uses $2 anymore?" My voice this time was less harsh than my previous question, but it still carried a tone of genuine inquiry and a touch of bewilderment. In this era, with electronic transactions dominating and small denominations often considered inconvenient, the fact that a man like Mr. Harrison would cherish a $2 bill enough to laminate seemed utterly irrational to me. It had no practical use. It couldn't be spent. So why keep it so carefully? Mr. Harrison looked up at me. His eyes were still strange, not sad, devoid of any melancholic trace, but also not smiling. They were profoundly calm, deep, as if they had witnessed so much, held so many stories I couldn't even begin to imagine. Those eyes held no judgment, no hint of disdain. They were simply present, a mysterious presence. He didn't rush to answer, seemingly weighing each word, each thought. Then he replied, his voice low, mellow, yet resonating in the quiet space. Not all money is meant to be spent. That sentence was like a lightning bolt through my mind, illuminating a hidden corner I had never considered. It was simple, yet it carried an astonishingly profound meaning, utterly alien to every concept of money I had ever known. In my world, money had only one purpose: to be spent, to buy goods, services, to pay debts, to survive. Money was a tool, a means of existence. But Mr. Harrison's words shattered that simplistic definition, opening up another dimension to the value of currency. I wanted to ask more. A torrent of questions flooded my mind. What is it for, then? What does it mean to you? Whose memory is it? My curiosity burned brighter than ever. I wanted to know the story behind that laminated $2 bill. I wanted to understand the philosophy behind his enigmatic statement. I felt like I was standing before a door, about to open to a new treasure trove of knowledge, an entirely different way of seeing the world. But Mr. Harrison didn't give me the chance. Just as I hesitated, about to speak, he turned back to finish the rest of his meal, as if the answer was complete. No further explanation, no encouraging glance for me to ask more. That decisiveness wasn't rudeness. It was a respect for another's self-discovery. It was like a riddle given, and the riddle giver wasn't obligated to explain every detail. The responsibility was mine, the recipient of the riddle, to find the solution myself. And then silence descended once more. This time, it no longer caused discomfort. Instead, it was a contemplative silence, a space for me to ponder Mr. Harrison's words on my own. Not all money is meant to be spent. The phrase echoed in my head, repeating like a mantra. It challenged all my core beliefs about value, about the purpose of life, about the meaning of things that seemed so simple. I looked down at my bento box, at the last few bites of rice. It was the same taste, the same setting, but everything had become different. I no longer felt like I was eating on charity, no longer felt judged. Instead, I felt like I was receiving an invaluable lesson, one not found in any book or lecture. A lesson about intangible values, about things that cannot be bought or sold with money. That $2 bill, carefully laminated, had become a symbol of a life philosophy I was gradually discovering. And I realized, perhaps, that Mr. Harrison's serenity wasn't for show, but was the result of his having understood things long ago that I, only now, was beginning to grasp. Part 5. A lunch without words, but full of memories. We ate in silence. This silence now no longer felt strained with tension as it had at first. It had softened considerably, though it hadn't quite reached complete comfort, let alone absolute peace. It was a contemplative silence, a space that allowed thoughts to wander. I still felt a slight distance, an invisible wall between Mr. Harrison and me, but it wasn't a wall of hostility or self-consciousness, but rather a wall of two entirely different rhythms of life. In that moment, as Mr. Harrison's chopsticks gently rested after each bite, my mind drifted to the past, to distant childhood memories. I thought of the first meal I could ever remember as a child. It wasn't a grand feast, nor an elaborate dish. In my memory, it was just a simple box of white rice, with a sprinkle of toasted sesame seeds on top. The fragrant smell of rice blended with the salty taste of sesame, a flavor of simplicity and scarcity. And accompanying that image of the rice box was a sound, a familiar phrase from my mother, echoing like a command. "Hurry up, son, or you'll be late for work." Those words weren't born of impatience, but of an urgency imbued with deep worry. My mother had to work tirelessly, and every delayed minute could impact our family's livelihood. My meals back then weren't for savoring, but for a hurried break between the endless cycles of life. I don't know when it started, but from that rushed, sesame-salted rice meal, eating for me always came with keywords: fast, hurried, anxious. It had become a deeply ingrained habit, a natural reaction of my body to the relentless pace of life. I ate to survive, to refuel for the next hours of work, to fulfill a mere biological need rather than to enjoy. I ate like a machine. My mouth chewed, my hand picked, but my mind was already on the next tasks. I didn't savor each bite, couldn't truly taste each dish. I didn't have time to stop, to breathe deeply, to genuinely feel the present moment. My life was a continuous chain of rushing, of things that needed to be done immediately, of worries that were ever present. And now, facing me was an old man, Mr. Harrison. He ate slowly, chewing each small bite thoroughly. After each mouthful, he would gently lay his chopsticks down on the table, as if placing a precious item. He was in no hurry, showed no signs of impatience. He ate as if this were the most important task in the world, and he had all the time in the universe to complete it. He seemed to embody ease, self-possession, a man for whom time was the most important thing in his life. This contrast was too stark, too brutally poignant. It no longer angered me. Instead, it evoked a faint melancholy. I realized that while I was living a life chased by time, swept away by worries, Mr. Harrison seemed to have mastered his time. He wasn't racing. He wasn't rushing. He lived in each moment, each breath, each bite. This lunch was without spoken words, yet it resonated within me with deep memories, profound reflections on how I had lived and how I wished to live. Part 6, The Watch and the Lesson No One Taught. The lunch concluded in near total silence. The bento box was empty, and the chopsticks were neatly laid beside it. I was still lost in thoughts about my rushed life, about the memory of that childhood rice meal, and about Mr. Harrison's inexplicable serenity. Though the atmosphere was no longer tense, my confusion lingered, like a thin mist obscuring my mind. Suddenly, Mr. Harrison moved. His gestures were still slow and deliberate, but this time, they weren't directed at the bento box or the familiar items on the table. He raised his hand to his wrist, taking off a watch. It was an old-fashioned wristwatch, not a smart device or an expensive designer timepiece one might expect from someone of his refined appearance. He placed it gently on the table, between us. I looked at the watch. It was old, its crystal face bearing countless faint scratches, like the marks of countless passing moments. The leather strap was faded and worn in places, revealing the darker hide beneath. It didn't look like a piece of jewelry, something to flaunt wealth or status. On the contrary, it exuded a familiar, intimate charm, more like a cherished keepsake, an item deeply bonded to its owner through many years. It was completely unlike the perfect, unblemished image I usually associated with Mr. Harrison. That watch, with its signs of time, suddenly made him feel more human in my eyes. He didn't look at me. His gaze remained fixed ahead, or perhaps deep into the void where his private memories resided. His voice rose, soft but clear, devoid of any superfluous emotion, as if he were recounting a story all too familiar to himself. I used to work 12 hours a day for 27 years. The numbers 12 hours a day and 27 years struck me like two electric shocks. I, a man who always prided myself on my diligence, constantly struggling with overtime, with work pressures to make a living, never imagined that a man as calm as Mr. Harrison had endured such a harsh life. The image of Mr. Harrison, leisurely reading, enjoying tea on his porch, suddenly crumbled, giving way to another. A man who had once been a workhorse, also crushed by time and labor. And then I realized, every day I sold 12 hours to earn money, only to use that money to buy brief moments of rest, buy medicine for stress, buy gifts to compensate my children whom I barely saw. Mr. Harrison's words weren't a lament, but a raw, cold truth. Sold 12 hours to earn money. That phrase pierced my mind. That was precisely what I was doing every single day. I was selling my labor, selling my precious time to earn a meager living. Then I also used that money to buy a little breathing room after stressful work hours, to buy painkillers when my body ached, and to buy shiny trinkets to soothe the guilt of not being able to spend more time with my loved ones. It was a vicious cycle, an invisible trap I had never realized I was caught in. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice still calm, but each word carrying immense weight, as if engraving itself into my mind. Freedom doesn't come from how much money you have. He paused for a moment, not to catch his breath, but as if to give me enough time to absorb and ponder the first part of his statement. Freedom doesn't come from how much money you have. This went completely against everything I had ever believed. I always thought money was the key to freedom. With money, you could buy anything, do anything you wanted, without worrying about any burdens. To me, money was power, a release from all constraints. But Mr. Harrison was shattering that core belief of mine. It comes when you stop having to sell your time to others. His final words were like a lightning bolt striking my ear. My entire worldview, my definitions of money, of freedom, of work suddenly shattered. Freedom wasn't a huge fortune in the bank, not a mansion or a supercar. Freedom was the right to own your own time, the right to decide how you used every minute of your life without being dependent on others. Mr. Harrison, with his current serene life, was living proof of that. He had stopped selling his time. I fell silent, not because he had made me feel awkward or uncomfortable anymore, also not because he was lecturing me, preaching a dry philosophy. No. I fell silent for a much deeper reason. Because he spoke exactly of how I was living, and yet couldn't truly live. He had articulated the precise pain, the precise naked truth about my life, objectively and non-judgmentally. I was living in that vicious cycle, selling time to earn money, then using that money to patch up the holes that selling time had created in my life. I had sacrificed sleep, health, moments with family, personal hobbies, all to exchange for a life I thought I needed to survive. But in reality, I was merely existing, not truly living. I was chasing a phantom freedom, while true freedom lay in mastering my own time. The old watch on the table with its marks of time, was no longer a symbol of Mr. Harrison's difficult working past. It became a symbol of realization, of the moment he chose to stop, to take ownership of his life. That was a lesson no one had ever taught me. No book I had ever read had articulated so clearly and profoundly. That lesson didn't come from a professor on a podium or a flashy financial expert. It came from a calm old man during a silent lunch, through an old watch and a simple yet wise statement. I sat there with all my definitions of money and freedom being rewritten in my mind. Lunch was over, but my journey of discovery, it seemed, had only just begun. Part 7. Financial freedom is lunch without rushing. The silence still enveloped us, but now it no longer felt like a pressure or a challenge. It was a space to breathe, to reflect. I no longer felt the need to speak or to try and fill the void. My gaze idly fell upon the empty bento box in front of me. Strangely, I couldn't recall the taste of the eggs that day, or whether the stir-fried vegetables were seasoned well. The details of the meal, which should have been the focus of a lunch, were entirely blurred. What I remembered most vividly, what was etched into my mind, was the feeling. That was the first time in my life I ate without checking my phone, without any urge to reach for my old mobile, to check messages or the time. I didn't count the minutes passing, no longer cared how long I had been sitting or how many minutes were left before I had to return to work. And most importantly, I didn't think about bills or deadlines at all. All the usual worries about money, about work deadlines, about the pressure to make a living, seemed to dissipate into the air in that moment. It was an incredibly strange and new state for me, a temporary liberation from the chains of my life. That silent lunch didn't immediately change my life. The next morning, I would still wake up early, still struggle with the lawnmower under the scorching sun, and still face the bills waiting to be paid. My current life was still full of burdens and pressures, but that lunch planted a strange seed within me, a new notion of wealth and freedom. I had always believed that wealth meant having a lot of money, a lot of possessions. That was the goal I had unconsciously pursued throughout my life, to earn as much money as possible, hoping that one day I would escape the cycle of poverty. But now, a different thought began to sprout in my mind. Perhaps being rich isn't about having more. It isn't about the numbers in a bank account or the value of material assets, but when you no longer need to rush. That was a completely new definition of wealth. Being rich wasn't about the speed of accumulation, but about the ability to slow down. It was when you weren't controlled by time, not driven by invisible pressures. It was when you could live in each moment completely, without haste, without worrying about what would come next. Wealth wasn't about buying everything, but about buying peace of mind. When you can sit and eat lunch completely. The lesson Mr. Harrison had conveyed through his actions touched something fundamental within me. Eating lunch completely, without rushing, without distraction, seemingly a simple act, was a symbol of profound freedom. It was the freedom from deadlines, from material worries, from the pressure to utilize every minute to earn money. It was the freedom to truly live in the present moment. In that ordinary lunch, I suddenly grasped a truth about money that no school or financial class had ever taught me. True value isn't in what you can spend, but in being free from time's relentless grip. This truth echoed in my mind, overturning all my ingrained beliefs. I realized I had been living as a slave to time, selling the most precious moments of my life to buy a life I mistakenly thought I needed to survive. But in reality, I was merely existing, not truly living. I was chasing a phantom freedom, while true freedom lay in mastering my own time. Mr. Harrison, with his serene demeanor, wasn't wealthy in the way I used to think of money, but he was the richest in time. And then I began to categorize the people I knew, the archetypes society celebrated, through an entirely new lens. The poor sell their time for money. They work tirelessly, sweat, exchanging every precious hour of their lives for an income, just enough to survive. They have no other choice, because that is the only way they can make a living. The rich use money to buy back time. They use their assets to hire others to work for them, to invest for profit, to create passive income, thereby freeing up time for themselves. They use money as a tool to achieve time freedom. And the free, they own it from the very beginning. This is the highest level, a philosophy of life. They don't sell their time because they have already mastered it. They can be those who have saved enough to retire early, or those who have found a way for their lives not to be dependent on selling time. They can be those who work out of passion, not financial pressure, or those who have simplified their lives so they don't need much money, and thus don't need to sell much time. They are the ones who have achieved the balance, the peace I only dared to dream of. That silent lunch was more than just a meal. It was a moment of enlightenment. It planted a new seed within me about financial freedom, not in the conventional understanding of money, but about the right to own my time and my life. A seed of peace and unhurried existence.